Following former Charlotte Hornets Miles Bridges' arrest, Michelle Johnson, his wife, posted a series of photos on Instagram showing alleged signs of abuse on her face and body.
Miles Bridges just faced a courtroom moment that could change everything, and it goes far beyond the sentence itself. We'll break down every detail of his arrest, plea deal, probation, and protective orders, showing how each step has shaped his personal and professional path. In this video, we'll unpack the full story and why this moment could define his future on and off the court. Initial arrest in Los Angeles. The story begins on June 29, 2022, when Miles Bridges, then emerging as one of the Charlotte Hornets' most valuable young players, was arrested in Los Angeles on a warrant tied to a suspected felony domestic violence incident. The arrest happened in West Los Angeles and was processed by local authorities. Bridges was taken into custody and later released on bail of approximately $130,000. While arrests of public figures often gain media attention, this one drew heightened scrutiny due to the nature of the alleged incident and the presence of his children at the time.
Just the last half hour, we have learned Charlotte Hornets star Miles Bridges turned himself into law enforcement in Lincoln County early this morning. Take a look. This is his mugshot.
What made the moment especially alarming for the public was the contrast between Bridges' rising NBA career and the seriousness of the allegations. Just weeks earlier, he had been considered a top free agency prospect, coming off a breakout season where he had shown significant potential as a franchise cornerstone. The arrest introduced a sudden and unexpected shift, placing his off-court life directly into the center of public conversation and raising immediate questions regarding his future. The setting also contributed to the weight of the event. Domestic violence cases involving children, even as witnesses, often receive strong legal and media attention. The alleged altercation involving his then-girlfriend and the presence of their children meant the situation would not be viewed as a minor or isolated matter. Instead, it framed the case as one carrying emotional, legal, and moral complexity. For Bridges personally, the arrest marked a turning point that extended beyond simple legal procedure. Professional athletes are accustomed to managing performance pressures, media responsibilities, and team expectations. But a criminal arrest introduces a different kind of scrutiny. Suddenly, discussions about his scoring, athleticism, or development were overshadowed by legal terminology, court dates, and allegations that posed long-term risks to his career. The incident also sparked immediate responses and speculation within the basketball world. Commentators, fans, and analysts questioned how the Hornets and the NBA would react, considering league policies and previous disciplinary histories involving players in similar situations. In this sense, the Los Angeles arrest served as the opening chapter in a broader sequence of legal and professional developments. It established the seriousness of the situation, placed Bridges' future into uncertainty, and signaled that what followed would involve both legal consequences and significant public attention. Charges filed following the incident. In the weeks following his arrest, the case against Miles Bridges became more clearly defined when prosecutors filed formal charges. On July 19, 2022, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office charged Bridges with 3 felony counts: 1 felony count of injuring the parent of a child and 2 felony counts of child abuse under circumstances likely to cause great bodily injury or death. The decision to file multiple felony charges signaled that prosecutors believed the case involved serious conduct warranting formal court proceedings rather than negotiation or immediate dismissal.
On Tuesday, prosecutors in Los Angeles formally filed charges against Charlotte Hornets forward Miles Bridges. Bridges, who led the Hornets in scoring last season, is facing 2 felony child abuse charges and a felony domestic violence charge as a result of an incident.
Bridges appeared in court shortly after the filing and entered a not guilty plea. His arraignment became widely reported across sports and news outlets, creating a visual and symbolic moment. A prominent NBA player, recently considered for major contract offers, now standing before a judge facing allegations that carried the potential for severe legal penalties. For many fans, the transition from seeing Bridges as an athlete to seeing him in a courtroom context was stark and underscored how quickly public narratives can shift. The charges themselves highlighted the legal system's concern for child safety in domestic violence environments. Prosecutors emphasized that the children were especially vulnerable when exposed to violence within the home. This phrasing is common in cases where minors are present, and while it does not mean the children were physically harmed, it reflects the state's position that witnessing such events can create serious risk. Including these counts elevated the gravity of the situation in the eyes of the law. Professionally, the filing of charges placed Bridges' career in a state of uncertainty. Teams and leagues typically withhold judgment until legal outcomes are defined, but the presence of formal felony charges meant that both the Hornets and the NBA had to prepare for potential long-term implications. For the Hornets, the timing was especially challenging because Bridges had been expected to receive a sizable contract extension. Instead, negotiations stalled indefinitely. The moment also marked a narrative shift. While the arrest introduced public awareness, the filing of charges confirmed that the situation was moving into a structured legal process. It changed the tone from speculation to procedure, with court dates, legal representation, and formal evidence now shaping the direction of the case. The filing stage effectively set the foundation for the plea negotiations and sentencing decisions that would follow. Plea agreement and sentencing. By November 2022, Bridges' case reached a turning point when he entered a plea agreement instead of proceeding to trial. He pled no contest to the felony charge of injuring a parent of a child. This type of plea does not admit guilt but accepts conviction and sentencing as if guilty. In exchange, the 2 felony child abuse charges were dismissed. The negotiated outcome meant Bridges avoided jail time, receiving instead a sentence of 3 years probation.
On Miles Bridges after his arrest right before last year's free agency period for felony domestic violence. I'll just go ahead and read you verbatim the 2 paragraphs from Baxter Holmes on ESPN.com so I don't get this incorrect. The NBA suspended Charlotte Hornets restricted free agent Miles Bridges for a total of 10 games in the 2023-24 season.
The probation terms were structured and extensive. They required Bridges to attend weekly domestic violence counseling sessions for 1 year and parenting classes for another year. He was also ordered to complete 100 hours of community service and undergo regular drug testing. In addition, he was prohibited from owning firearms and was required to comply with a 10-year protective order preventing contact with the victim beyond matters involving their children. These conditions reflected the court's emphasis on monitoring behavior, encouraging rehabilitation, and ensuring long-term protection. From a legal standpoint, the plea agreement represented a compromise. It eliminated the risk of a lengthy trial and potential prison sentence while still imposing significant consequences. Plea deals of this nature are not uncommon in domestic violence cases, especially when both parties prefer to avoid the uncertainty of a trial. For Bridges, the sentence meant that he could theoretically return to the NBA while fulfilling the terms of his probation. However, the situation extended beyond legal outcomes. His public image, team relationships, and contract prospects were affected. The Hornets had to consider not only his role on the court, but also the broader perception and the organizational implications of keeping him on the roster. The sentencing highlighted a broader conversation about athletes and accountability. Sports organizations often face challenges when off-court legal issues intersect with on-court value. Bridges' plea deal became part of a larger discussion within the NBA about how to address cases involving domestic violence, both in terms of player rehabilitation and league conduct standards. Ultimately, the plea agreement did not fully resolve the situation. It marked the transition into a monitored, probation-governed phase that would affect every area of Bridges' personal and professional life. It closed one chapter of the criminal case but opened ongoing responsibilities and scrutiny. NBA suspension related to the case. After Bridges' legal case reached its initial resolution, the NBA conducted its own review, as the league has separate disciplinary authority under its domestic violence policy. In April 2023, the NBA announced a 30-game suspension without pay. This suspension acknowledged the seriousness of the incident and reinforced the league's stance on player conduct, regardless of whether jail time was imposed.
We got the news on Friday that the NBA has completed its investigation on Miles Bridges.
However, because Bridges did not play during the entire 2022-23 season, due to both the unresolved legal case and the Hornets' decision to withhold him from competition, the league credited him for 20 of the 30 suspended games. This meant that only the first 10 games of the 2023-24 season would count as active suspension. While this decision followed league protocol, it became a point of debate among some observers who questioned whether the credited games reflected appropriate accountability. The suspension signaled that even though the legal system had concluded its portion, professional consequences would continue. For the Hornets, the suspension meant adjusting early season roster plans and managing public communication about Bridges' eventual return. For Bridges, it meant re-entering the league under heightened scrutiny, with expectations that his conduct, professionalism, and performance would be monitored closely. The NBA's action also brought forward broader questions that often arise in cases involving athletes and legal issues. How should leagues balance rehabilitation with discipline? How do teams integrate players back into competitive environments following serious allegations? What expectations should be placed on players returning from suspensions tied to personal conduct? From a career standpoint, the suspension affected Bridges financially and reputationally. Missing games reduces immediate earnings and can impact future contract negotiations. It also shapes public perception, as suspensions remain part of a player's history and are often referenced in media coverage. For Bridges, returning after suspension required navigating both basketball responsibilities and the weight of public attention. The formal disciplinary action by the NBA confirmed that his off-court situation had long-term implications for his professional identity. While the suspension did not end his career, it reframed his trajectory by placing character and conduct alongside athletic performance as major determinants of his future. Violation of the protective order and new warrant. After his initial plea agreement and probation terms were set, Miles Bridges was expected to follow several strict court-ordered conditions. One of the most important was the Domestic Violence Protective Order, which required him to avoid contact with the protected individual, maintain physical distance, and avoid behavior that could be interpreted as threatening or confrontational. These orders are taken seriously by courts, especially in domestic violence cases, because they are designed to prevent further conflict or potential harm.
Hornets Miles Bridges issued criminal summons for allegedly smashing windshield, violating his protective order.
However, months after the agreement was finalized, law enforcement received information about an alleged incident involving Bridges that suggested he may have violated the protective order. Reports described an altercation during which property was damaged and the protected individual was present. According to authorities, Bridges was in a location or situation where he was not permitted to be under the terms of the order. This immediately raised concerns, as any violation, whether intentional or unintentional, can trigger legal consequences. When investigators reviewed the claims and collected statements, they determined there was enough evidence to justify the issuance of a new arrest warrant. The warrant did not relate to the original domestic violence case, but rather to the possible failure to comply with the conditions set by the court. Violating a protective order is considered a separate offense, and in some cases, it can carry penalties that are more severe than the initial charges. This development placed Bridges under renewed public and legal scrutiny. For individuals on probation, compliance is essential. Even a minor slip can lead to modification of probation terms or potential jail time. The new warrant demonstrated how carefully monitored his situation was and how important adherence to the order was to the court. For Bridges, the violation did not immediately result in incarceration, but it did reopen legal processes that were previously stabilizing. It also raised questions about whether his probation terms would be adjusted and whether further investigation would lead to more charges. This incident became a notable turning point in his ongoing legal situation, as it showed that the case remained active and subject to further developments based on his actions. Additional charges filed after new evidence. Following the investigation into the alleged protective order violation, prosecutors reviewed additional evidence related to the incident. As a result, they decided to file several new misdemeanor charges against Miles Bridges. These charges were separate from his original domestic violence case and reflected the specific behavior reported during the newer incident.
The woman reportedly required medical attention, but the extent of her injuries is unknown. Bridges was charged and released on $130,000 bail.
Among the new charges were child abuse, injury to personal property, and domestic criminal trespassing. In North Carolina law, a child abuse misdemeanor can include situations where a minor is present during an incident that may cause emotional distress or exposure to unsafe behavior. Prosecutors stated that a child was present during the reported disturbance, which legally met the threshold for the charge. There was no claim of physical harm, but emotional exposure alone can qualify. The property damage charge related to items that were allegedly broken during the incident. This is treated as a separate offense because the destruction of property, even within a household context, becomes a criminal matter when reported to authorities. The domestic criminal trespass charge suggested that Bridges entered or remained in a location where he was not allowed, based on the protective order and legal boundaries already established by the court. These new charges expanded the scope of the legal case significantly. Because Bridges was already on probation, any new allegations automatically carried more weight. Prosecutors often treat post-plea incidents as indicators of whether a defendant is complying with rehabilitation and behavioral expectations set by the court. The filing of additional charges meant that Bridges now had multiple ongoing legal concerns, each requiring separate review, hearings, and potential penalties. For someone already managing court-mandated conditions like counseling, classes, and check-ins, the legal workload increased substantially. Beyond legal implications, the new charges influenced public perception and raised questions about whether further consequences, either from the legal system or the NBA, would follow. They also contributed to renewed media attention, as any new detail became part of the broader examination of his conduct. These additional charges did not determine guilt on their own, but they did extend the timeline of his case, created additional responsibilities for him to address, and added complexity to a situation many thought had already reached its legal conclusion. NBA's response and extended suspension impact. While the court system worked through its processes, the NBA conducted its own independent investigation into the allegations involving Miles Bridges. When a player faces serious legal issues, the league reviews evidence, gathers information from police reports, interviews involved parties when possible, and determines whether disciplinary action is appropriate under its policies.
First, we didn't really know many of the details or even who the altercation was with. But today, as you said, Bridges' wife, Michelle Johnson, shared photos to her Instagram of the injuries that she obtained in the altercation and detailed that she was choked until she went to sleep and suffered a severe concussion.
After completing this review, the NBA announced a 30-game suspension for Bridges. This suspension fell under the league's domestic violence, assault, and misconduct policy. Because Bridges had already missed the entire prior season due to the initial case, the league credited him with having served 20 of the 30 games, meaning he was required to sit out an additional 10 games before returning to play. The league's statement described his actions as serious misconduct, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. While the credited games sparked debate, the total length of the suspension placed his punishment among the longer penalties issued for off-court conduct. The approach aligned with how the NBA has historically handled similar cases, balancing its disciplinary standards with the timeline of legal proceedings. The suspension had several practical effects. Contract negotiations were impacted because teams often hesitate to invest heavily in players facing potential legal uncertainty or public relations challenges. Bridges ultimately signed shorter-term agreements instead of the longer, more lucrative deal he was once projected to earn. Sponsors also kept their distance, as companies typically avoid association with athletes undergoing legal scrutiny. This not only affected earnings but also public visibility, since endorsements often shape a player's broader career profile. Within the Hornets organization, leadership had to address questions regarding their decision to keep Bridges on the roster. Their stance drew mixed reactions from fans and analysts, and the situation contributed to broader discussions about accountability in professional sports. While the suspension allowed Bridges to resume playing after completing the required number of games, it ensured that the incident remained part of his professional record. The NBA's handling of the situation demonstrated how off-court actions can significantly influence a player's career trajectory, even after legal sentencing is complete. Final court sentencing and emotional reaction. During the final sentencing hearing, the court reviewed the full scope of Miles Bridges' legal situation. This included the original domestic violence case, the plea agreement, the conditions of his probation, and the newly filed misdemeanor charges related to the later incident. Sentencing hearings in such cases are structured to ensure that all legal expectations and consequences are clearly communicated to the defendant.
Bridges pleaded not guilty today in the court of law. That sets up his next court appearance, which is going to be August 19th. Now, under California law, a felony domestic assault conviction carries a max of 5 years in prison and 5 years of probation.
The judge confirmed that Bridges would receive 3 years of supervised probation, during which he must follow specific requirements. These included completing domestic violence counseling, anger management classes, and a set amount of community service hours. Additionally, the no-contact order with the protected individual was reaffirmed and clarified to prevent misunderstandings or unintentional violations. The court also emphasized that probation leaves limited room for error. Any violation, whether through new charges, failure to complete required programs, or non-compliance with reporting procedures, could result in modified probation or potential jail time. This is standard protocol for domestic violence-related probation. Reports from the courtroom described Bridges as visibly overwhelmed when the terms were read, though the situation was not portrayed as dramatic or disruptive. It reflected the weight of the long-term obligations he would be required to follow. For many defendants, sentencing hearings mark the moment when the long-term structure of their legal responsibilities becomes clear and final. The sentence did not include jail time, largely because of his earlier plea agreement and the nature of the probation system designed to encourage counseling and rehabilitation rather than immediate incarceration. Still, the extended probation period and required programs represented significant commitments that would influence his daily life, career schedule, and personal decisions. The hearing effectively concluded the primary legal phase of the case, though the separate misdemeanor charges still required follow-up and resolution. The sentencing also signaled that while the criminal portion of the case was was reaching its conclusion, compliance with the terms would extend for several years. This final step outlined the expectations placed on Bridges going forward and established the framework for his legal responsibilities. While not dramatic, it was a significant moment that formally defined the consequences of the case and the obligations he would have to meet moving forward. Before you go, remember, the story behind Miles Bridges' arrest, plea deal, and probation is far from fully revealed. The legal steps, the restrictions, the ongoing responsibilities, it's all part of a situation the public has only seen pieces of. If you want to see what happens next, the compliance, the league's response, and how Bridges navigates his career and personal life, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next developments could change everything.